So thank you so much, Daphne, for coming on and sharing your experience today. I'm really excited to be able to present this to people and allow them to also learn from it. You recently completed a 400-mile cycling race. And so very excited to dive deeper into that. What got you all the way to this point in your cycling career and what you've learned along the way. So I'm going to let you go ahead and take it away and tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you're located, what your usual cycling is like.
Yeah, so first I was a runner in high school and college, not competitively. It was just something I did for fun, but I did tend to gravitate towards longer runs. I really liked the half marathon distance, but that started wearing down my body and I got into cycling first as cross training, but then I became obsessed with it. I decided I loved going fast. I loved how far I could explore on the bike. And one of the things I realized was the more you eat, the longer you could ride. So a lot of the long distance things just turn into an eating competition. And you can just keep going if you know how to fuel yourself and take care of yourself properly. And so I was doing some longer rides, like over 100 miles. And I realized that those were my favorite type of days, was when I just spent the whole day on the bike. I just felt so happy afterwards, and felt like I was really accomplishing something. So I had a few friends who did this particular race the year before, um, and said they had a blast. The photos looked beautiful. It was only a 3-hour drive from where I live in Austin, so it seemed like a good race to kind of get my feet wet with this type of riding. And so this fall, I decided to just go for it and sign up. At the time, I hadn't ever ridden more than, I think, 115 miles when I signed up for it, and which was probably like 9 hours on the
Sounds
bike at the
great. Yeah.
longest. Yeah, which is still a big day, but not compared to 400 miles. It's still a huge jump up. So, but I was kind of just going off of, I knew that if I trained for it, I could find a way to do it. I was really determined. And I really would only say I trained for 3 months for the event, starting like end of December, pretty
So you
much.
were kind of actively cycling and doing different events leading up to it, and even swimming at
Yes,
some point a little bit too.
I was, yeah. Um, but early December, I kind of took a few weeks off. I got sick more than once.
Yeah, totally.
Um, Spent some time skiing and relaxing, and then I really dove into training after that.
It's nice that it was kind of seasonal for you, so you can kind of like gear up. I think that a lot of training does have cycles like that where you have
Mhm.
a lower period and then you're able to ramp up. And I think that is a really nice way for your body to kind of recover and rejuvenate itself before you do a bigger effort. Um, so you said you did mostly like around 100, a little over 100-mile rides preparing for this. Was that your training rides or was that just races for you?
It was a mix. I think one of the things that really gave me confidence was at the beginning of January, after I'd only been really back on the bike for 2 weeks or so, post sickness and skiing and stuff. I did a 120-mile race that had some gravel sections, and I felt really good the whole day. And that was when I was like, okay, I think I can do this actually. This doesn't feel so crazy anymore. And I started connecting more with other people in my community who were signed up for this race. So I did most of my training with other people who are also going to be doing the race. And that gave me confidence as well, especially talking to people who'd done it the year before.
Mhm.
And pretty much we just did at least a century every weekend. I think our longest ride was 140 miles and it was all gravel. So it took us around 10 hours or so. But that was the longest. And that's still like a little over a third of the 400-mile distance. So
Yeah.
it was still intimidating going in. I didn't feel totally ready, but I also felt like I'd never be fully ready. So Yeah.
So I know that you're plant-based, and you and I have kind of been working a little bit on your nutrition prior to this. What do you think were some of the most useful things that you focused on prior to doing the race to help you prepare with your nutrition to be able to complete something like this?
I think one of the best things I did was practicing eating real food on the bike, even during shorter rides. And by real food, I just mean like not gels or chews, not the food that's just formulated for cycling, eating sandwiches and muffins, chips, cookies, things like that, that are a little harder to digest. But practicing with those foods was good because it did kind of give my stomach a chance to figure out how it reacted to certain things, what I would be wanting to eat on the bike, and also gave me a chance to practice actually physically eating on the bike while moving. Um, because it's really easy to just suck down a gel while biking, but it's a lot harder to eat a thing of crackers or something crumbly. So I kind of had to practice that aspect as well.
Yeah, yeah, I think practice makes perfect in a lot of that, and just starting to train your digestive system, be able to handle that and like learn to process it while you have so much blood flowing to the other parts of your body
Mhm.
is huge. I know energy regulation was something you were working through early on when we first got together. Trying to stay awake in class and figuring out a balance with that. What were some of the more useful things for you to be able to, keep your energy levels throughout the day while also training very hard outside of your day-to-day life?
I think that eating more frequent meals was one of the things I learned. Um, Keeping like snacks on me consistently and also making sure I was really getting all the essential nutrients. Like I was eating snacks that have a balance between carbs and fats and protein, not just spending like half the day only eating carbs, half the day only eating protein rich foods. In the past, like I felt like I was eating really healthy, but my diet wasn't necessarily balanced throughout the day. So my energy levels would go up and down depending on when I was eating and how much I was eating, what I was eating, etc.
Yeah, yeah. And I know as a vegan athlete, the iron and B12 comes up a lot. And when we did your lab works, do you mind if I share that?
Of course, yeah.
We actually found that your B12 was pretty high because you were being very proactive about supplementation. So it was neat to be able to see that a lot of the practice you were putting into place were giving you more than enough of what you needed. And we could actually back off on some of those supplements and have that less as a part of your program and utilizing more of the whole foods and fortified foods as an option for you.
Yeah, exactly. People always ask how I get enough nutrients to exercise this much as a vegan. And it's interesting because I mean, I feel better as a vegan. I think I can get everything really well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's neat, and I see a lot of ultra endurance athletes, utilizing plant-based diets and experimenting. So I think it's awesome that you are, finding your way and really continuing to break the mold for women's sports and endurance and be able to put this into practice. I know that out of um the field, I think that you said there was 70 people who signed up for this race. And how many people actually finished?
I believe around 40 so finished. Some people didn't make it to the start line when they saw how
That's half
the
the
weather
battle is
was.
showing up.
So quite a few people did not come, but out of the people who finished, I believe 7 of them were women. And it was somewhere between 40 and 45 people, I think.
That's incredible. What do you think were the major challenges people faced during the ride, and what were some of the ones that you faced yourself?
Personally, one of the biggest challenges was the weather. It was pretty cold. I usually have an easy time eating and drinking when the weather's warm.
Mhm.
However, when the weather's cold, for whatever reason, my body just freaks out a bit and I have a much harder time getting water in. And then when I'm not drinking water, I have a harder time eating. I am from sunny Austin, so I'm not used to dealing with a lot of cold weather while riding. And especially this winter, we had a really warm winter. So all my training rides were done in warm weather pretty much. I think that was a challenge for quite a few people. And I think also for me, a specific challenge was I got very nauseous at one point from I am guessing it was from eating on the bike mostly that day and eating on really bumpy gravel roads where my stomach didn't have a chance to settle and digest. I talked to a few other people who had similar problems, and I think the solution I'll be implementing is taking quick breaks to eat in the future, at least some of the time while riding.
Yeah, and I think we also talked a little bit about possibly, since the weather was cold, the hydration factor could have played a role in that gastric
Definitely.
distress. Yeah. Um, yeah, so kind of walk us through what this race looked like for you. When did you start? How long did it take you? What did your life look like while on the bike for 400 miles?
So I started the race at 8 a.m. on Friday, March 17th. And my intention was to pretty much ride through the night and maybe take a short stop. But originally, I thought I would be able to finish by Saturday night. And that was kind of what all my planning for the race had looked like. Like I'd marked out what stores I thought I'd be stopping at, what their hours were, and planned to go a little bit slower than I thought I could, but even so, the weather wound up making me and everyone else, to be fair, a bit slower on the first day. We had a horrible headwind, and we also had really muddy conditions that made for just barely being able to pedal forward. And so I found myself probably like 5 hours behind or so where I thought I would be towards the end of the day, 4 or 5 hours back. And I also was getting really cold at that point. We had started in the rain in the morning, so most of my gear hadn't fully dried out even by the end of the day.
And what
So
were the temps that day
I think they were in the 50s pretty much the whole day, but going down into the high 30s at night
with rain?
with some rain, yeah, and wind. Um,
Nothing like a cold, wet 400-mile ride.
Yeah, and there were water crossings to go through as well. So at one point in the day, we'd kind of finally warmed up and dried out a little bit, but we went through a really deep water crossing, got our feet
Wow.
really wet again.
What kind of bike were you on?
I was on a Cervelo Sparrow gravel bike.
Okay.
hmm And so I wound up stopping the first night. I spent it in a hotel. I really didn't sleep that well, honestly. My body was still feeling very stressed out from the whole day, very wound up. I didn't really have sleeping clothes. I was just like sleeping in my kit. Um, and it was good though. I'm glad I got some sleep. And then in the morning, I felt so much better, felt warm again finally. I got the best tasting latte of my life at Starbucks and felt motivated to hit the road. And then that day, I really just pushed the entire day. I didn't stop very much. I stopped one time after probably about like 5 or 6 hours of riding at that point. I bought some snacks and just hopped right back on my bike. And then I rode probably another 6 hours or so before I stopped again fully. And that was a little bit after sunset because I was concerned about safety riding on some of the roads after that. And we had trackers where we could see all the other participants. So I knew there was a group coming up behind me and decided to wait for them before riding the highway section in the dark, which was a good decision. We felt a lot safer as a group.
Yeah.
But then we rode till about 3 a.m. or so that night. By the end, I was the coldest I have ever felt in my life, I would say, just miserably cold. I was able to take a couple-hour nap in my car because we did actually go past the finish line before we continued on to do a 70-mile loop at the end to come back and finish. And the cars were neutral zones. So I took a little bit of a nap in my car, waited till the sun came out in the morning, and then finish the next day. And Sunday was great. It was warm outside. Yeah, it felt really nice to just have a good end to the race at that point.
Geez, that's so much. That's a lot of riding. How many hours do you think it took you?
I believe it was 35 hours of moving time and 55, 56 hours of total elapsed time.
That's crazy. That's a lot.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
And so I was really happy at the end just to finish and feel great. But my goal in the future is to get that elapsed time down, try to make it through a race with minimal sleep.
yeah. Looking back now, what would be some things that you would do differently, if you were in the same race, with the weather conditions and your availability to food? I know when you were talking about you got pushed back 4 or 5 hours off schedule, and when you and I were chatting previously, those grocery stores or gas station stops that you were going to hit by the time you'd gotten there were already closed. So that definitely put a different dynamic into your schedule there. Knowing what you
Definitely.
know now, how would you have changed things?
Well, for one, I brought a slightly larger hydration pack immediately after that I have an extra half-liter water capacity in
Mhm.
because specifically I ran out of water during that time. I didn't run out of food. Um, I probably would have brought a little bit more food. I brought a fair amount of my food with me, but I still think that having a few more options in my pack would have been nice because pretty much the gas stations and grocery stores all have the same few things. And at a certain point, I just didn't want anything that they had. Nothing sounded good to me. It was all highly processed junk food. And I think more dried fruit would have been nice. That was something that really tasted good and seemed to fuel me well while I was riding, something that I brought. Um, I also brought a lot of gels that I didn't wind up consuming. So in the future, I'll still probably bring a couple, but I brought like 10 or 12 or something, thinking that that would be an appropriate amount. And honestly, I think that gels, it's fine to just save for emergencies, and it wasn't necessary to bring all of those. Same with, I really overdid it with the hydration powder. I brought a lot of it, and hydration powder takes up space and is kind of heavy. I could have just brought sports drinks at gas stations instead, and that would have saved me some weight and allowed for more food I could have packed. And also, I probably would have brought more hand warmers, more of the chemical kind as well, to just have for emergencies, staying warm.
Um, all great things. And I know with the hydration factor, you and I were chatting a bit about how you were kind of getting flavor fatigue with some of the sports drinks, and like you kept, going towards the water instead. Uh,
Mhm.
and even bringing more of just plain water seemed like a good one. And I like the idea of just utilizing the gas stations, because there's always going to be sports drinks there, unless you have like a really specific preference. I think that that's nice to utilize those. Um, and yeah, I think the cold was the biggest surprise for when we were planning this for you.
Definitely.
Hmm.
Yeah. One other thing about the gas stations, the hot coffee was the best. That was one of my favorite things on the ride.
Um, so the caffeine definitely seemed like it helped you a lot on this ride. And it seemed like hunger or like appetite was one that was difficult for you to regulate. Do you have anything that you found to be useful there, or anything of that nature?
Um, the hot coffee actually, I think, did help with my appetite as well, just getting me warmed up and feeling a little more energetic. I was able to eat more. The other thing that helped me was CBD gummies. I took quite a few of them during the race, and they help stimulate my appetite and get rid of some of the nausea symptoms as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice to kind of see that be utilized in a different way for athletes, and have some different options there, because I think that those ultra endurance events, like you mentioned, like it is an eating race.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like, how can we continue to stimulate that appetite? I know that more professional cycling leagues, like obviously you have restrictions around that, but for recreation athletes, you or even just like, outside competitive athletes, you are able to be more experimental with
Yes.
the things that you do with your nutrition. And I think that's really neat because a lot of the research is based off of what you guys are doing, trial and error in the field. And then 10 years later it gets proven, and then we're like, oh yeah, this actually works. So it's neat to see, you trying different things and finding success in new ways, especially that it helped to alleviate some of the nausea for you.
Yeah, one of the things I actually like about the endurance racing scene and gravel racing is that there is no overarching governing body. So there is like a lot more experimental stuff going on. The races have a lot more variations in them. They aren't necessarily as strict and cut and dry as some of the road racing, which is cool.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's very neat. Um, And then anything that you found to help you recover from something like that? Like, were you out for a week? Were you able to recover pretty quickly? Was it next day, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed? Like,
Interestingly, I think that so immediately the day after I felt bad. I felt like I was sick. I didn't actually think I was sick, but it was really hard for me to consume food. Um, I felt really bloated when I would eat, but then I'd feel hungry the rest of the time. So I was still having issues with getting enough food, and having my body feel good when I was eating. That took, I think, 2.5 days or so to go away. The other thing was sleeping was hard. I still felt like my heart rate was really high. There was a lot of energy coursing through my body and it was hard to sleep. But just still trying to get myself eating enough, eating meals consistently throughout the day, getting good healthy nutrients in, especially after mostly eating processed foods the few days before. I also relied on things that were easy to digest, like soup and smoothies post race. And I actually was able to race again, a short crit race on Thursday night. So 4 days after, and I felt amazing actually during it. It went really well. So I think the recovery worked.
yeah, yeah, it sounds like it. And especially with the heart racing, my thoughts there is that from the simple carbohydrate intake from during the race, overtraining, and the body's sympathetic nervous system is on overdrive, and even thinking about like how could we utilize breathing practices to help to like restructure that nervous system and kind of ground things, and then going back to nutrition, I love that you are utilizing more healthy wholesome foods. And my thoughts there is like whole grains, root vegetables, are a really wonderful way to actually just ground yourself and root down, if you will, when you see that energy kind of getting up there.
Yeah, one of the first things I was able to eat that felt really good was just whole grain toast, actually. I had like 4 slices of it. It was so good.
Um, what are some of your favorite go-to snacks while on the bike?
Dried fruit is amazing. Um, I also recently tried doing homemade Rice Krispie treats. Those were really good and tasted great. Um, I like salty snacks like pickles a lot, and most gas stations have them, which is nice. I do really like potato chips, but I did find during this race the salt started hurting my mouth pretty quickly and kind of how sharp the chips are. So I still really like them in shorter things, but not as much for really long stuff. Um, my other favorite is the cucumber lime flavored Gatorade. I always find really refreshing and delicious.
Those are great. Yeah. And I feel like that hydration factor kind of coming back into play with your mouth getting cut up. But
Mhm.
also, I feel like even if
Definitely.
you're not dehydrated, sometimes that stuff will cut your mouth up. So interesting to think about that there. And I like the Rice Krispie ones. Um, my wheels are turning like, how could we make a savory version of these Rice Krispies and like
Yeah.
find, which would be cool. I know we tried doing some rice balls with you as an experiment. And it seemed like that was difficult to consume on the bike, but did it sit well? Did you have
Yeah, it
fun?
sat well and it tasted good, but the rice wasn't sticky enough to stay together. So then I'm like trying to eat it and it's falling apart in my mouth, and which is challenging when you're moving
Yeah.
and trying not to choke.
Do you think if you were to stop, that would still be something that you would incorporate, or do you think you would probably transition to like a burrito or some other form of food?
I would still eat them when I was stopped, but this time I brought maybe 5 of them, and that was a little bit of overkill. I'd
Mhm.
probably only bring 2 in the future. Um, and each one was about a quarter cup uncooked rice for context. So they were pretty dense. And I did like them though, but in general, I like having food options that I can eat on or off the bike because it's just hard to plan when you might be eating on the bike, when you might take a stop. I
Yeah.
realized during this race that pretty much all my plans immediately went out the window once I started rolling. So at a certain point, I really was reaching for the stuff in my bag that was just easiest and fastest to eat because that was what I felt like I needed to do to keep going and keep moving and pushing my pace.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's not like you're doing a road race where you have like designated stops. Um, so it is seems to be a much less predictable style of racing.
Yeah, and not all the stops are even on the route. Some of them require taking little detours off the route to get to. And so and also we're in a rural area. The store hours aren't necessarily consistent with what they have on the website.
Mhm.
Um, Especially on the weekends, a place might say it's open till 8 p.m., but if they're feeling tired at 7 p.m., they'll just close. So
Yeah. Um, any words of the wise if you were at the starting line, getting ready to go, would there be anything that you would say to yourself or kind of like try to remind yourself to do during the race?
I think minimizing stopping time for reasons, unnecessary reasons, like just stopping and sitting down and talking to people, even though that's fun. I could have saved myself a lot of time, maybe made it to some of those store stops in that case, if I hadn't spent time honestly dilly-dallying earlier on. But at the same time, I would tell myself it's worth it to stop for things like eating at a certain point. It's not worth making yourself sick by continuing not to stop and then having to slow down so much that I lost time. So in the future, really I would just be more mindful with my stops, I would say. Um, Try to take advantage when I am feeling well and keep the stops short and quick, but later on in the race, take a few more breaks in order to help myself with digestion and everything.
It makes me think of the old tortoise and the hare. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you're a little bit more methodical with things and like take the time it takes, that it takes less time in the end.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, and kind of highlighting what worked for you, what didn't, how you would change things. I think that this is super helpful for anyone who's looking to do any sort of endurance riding, or ultra endurance riding in your
Mm-hmm.
case. So, thank you so much for sharing and um, helping other people do some cool things too.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.